full employment, and we do have an inflation problem. So you would expect growth to slow, and it has slowed.
Right.
So we're continuing to grow. We have positive growth, but it's slowed substantially. We still have a strong labor market. And look, what you're seeing is some writing down of expectations for future growth that is inducing firms to rethink how many people they really need to hire. So we've seen the beginnings of job openings beginning to just fall off a little bit. We're certainly not seeing major
when do you
layoffs.
think we see that, though? I mean, we're going to have a number of CEOs here who have actually just cut staff. So Meta, Amazon, a lot of big companies are starting to do this. But when do you think you're going to start to see those in the numbers? And again, is 4%? Do you think a number that is quote unquote politically palatable, 4.5%? When you sort of project and talk inside your own office, what's the conversation?
I'm not sure what the right number is, but certainly historically we would have considered numbers with unemployment in the fours to be a very healthy labor market. Most people who write down estimates of what is full employment, what is the unemployment rate that goes with that, would say that an unemployment rate in the fours is healthy. So, perhaps, look, I think we can make a lot of progress in the labor market just on the hiring intention side, job opening side. I don't think it's necessary to see very substantial layoffs. The tech sector is special. They have been hit in a slowing economy, declining ad revenue, and then, of course, they benefited massively from the boom in technology during the pandemic. So I think there are some special factors that are affecting that sector. But the U.S. economy is slowing down, but it's operating at a very healthy level. And look, consumers remain in good shape. Their finances are healthy. Banks are in a healthy state.
What numbers, what data, metrics do you look at on a daily basis to try to figure out where things are? What's the most important thing?
I look at all the data, but it's a habit that's, for me, left over from Fed days. But certainly I look at numbers pertaining to the job market, and probably the employment report, we'll get one on Friday, is probably the single most important report, along with inflation.
You just mentioned something that made me think of a personal question for you, which is, do you feel you have more influence and power in this job, or you had more influence and power in the job at the Fed?
They're totally different jobs. And I love the job at the Fed. You have an enormous amount of influence. The people in that room.
But a lot of people say the Fed right now is controlling, to some degree, the economy, even more than anyone in the world of politics, per se. You think that's right?
In terms of the overall outlook for the economy and the progress of inflation in the job market, the Fed probably has a more important role than any other single thing, but many things influence the course of the economy, whether it's the progress of Russia's brutal war against Ukraine, COVID lockdowns in China, lots of things play a role, but the Fed, of course, is important. It's their job to make sure to pursue both maximum employment and price stability jointly.
Since you've sat in that role before, what do you think about the fact that members of Congress now publicly ridicule, complain about the Fed? What do you think about that?
I think it's part of the job, and the Fed has to ignore. It needs to understand what people think about what it's doing, because there's maybe very, very important information in that. But the Fed is a professional, non-political organization, and it's filled with trained, competent people who are trying to make their best judgments about what policy course is best for the U.S. economy. and they need to stay focused on that goal. And my experience has been that they do exactly that.
Two more inflation questions, and then I'm going to move on, I promise. One is, when you think about trying to tame inflation, given the seat you're in, how do you think about lifting, for example, tariffs on China? How do you think about, for example, modifying, green cards and immigration policies for skilled labor? Wouldn't that help?
Well, we have certainly tried to play a complementary role. So I think the way I look at inflation is the primary task falls to the Fed, but we want to do things that also contribute to easing cost of living pressures on households. Right. We've looked at tariffs, and look, these tariffs on China were imposed because of unfair trade practices that still exists. It would have some impact on prices or inflation on a one-shot basis, but one should not overestimate what impact lowering the tariffs would have. I mean, a tenth or two on inflation probably.
So you think not
Most
enough?
people would not notice it in a major way in their daily lives. It does go in the right direction. Look, what we've done, what President Biden has done, is use the strategic oil releases from the Strategic Petroleum Reserve to hold down the prices of gas when they skyrocketed. The Inflation Reduction Act is going to lower drug prices. Insulin prices are going to come down to no more than $35 a month. Healthcare premium prices are going to be held down. And the Inflation Reduction Act also, starting next year, people are going to be able to get rebates for energy-efficient appliances, for electric heat pumps that they install in their homes, insulation and the like.
Let me ask you a related question. Biden's going to be talking with Macron tomorrow. This actually relates to the Inflation Reduction Act because it deals with the idea of industrial policy. As you know, some of the Europeans are very unhappy about our industrial policy because it may impact their ability to sell vehicles and other things here in the U.S. in a price competitive way. There's been something that we've all talked about since the pandemic called friendshoring.
Yes.
Right? Which is
yeah,
to say
I've talked about that too.
Right? You've talked about friendshoring.
I have.
Well, this is not that friendly.
Well, look, it is reasonably friendly. We are concerned about over-dependence on China and Russia to some extent for critical supplies, especially for electric vehicles. We're highly dependent on China for most of the minerals that go into making batteries. And an objective of the Inflation Reduction Act is to have more adequate supply chains among our friends, our trading partners. So a requirement of that act is that to qualify for the portion of the credit, it's necessary that the minerals come from or be processed in trade partners that are our friends, and that is a form of friendshoring.
I'm going to pivot the conversation. Let's talk crypto for a second, because you and I have talked crypto for a long time, and I don't know if I'm projecting onto you, but I thought you were very skeptical of crypto.
I have been skeptical.
As I have been. And then there was a period of time where I thought, as this train seemed like it was leaving the station, I think a lot of us who were so skeptical thought, are we making a mistake? Is there something real to this? What's happening here? And I was sensing from you a little bit of, oh, well, maybe we actually have to figure out what this thing is because maybe the whole thing actually is real. I don't know. Well, where are you now in light of SBF?
So I have been skeptical, and I remain quite skeptical. But I will say, look, we have to be open to financial innovation.